Hello and welcome to another edition of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. My name is Neil Parekh. I am the guest host today. Our guest is Bryan Miller, former New York Times restaurant critic and author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. We're so glad you're joining us. We're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Please let us know where you're watching from, and let us know, please comment, retweet, share, tag your friends. We want to have as many people watch as possible. I want to start off at the outset that we are going to be talking about some serious issues. We will be talking about depression. We'll be talking about suicide might come up as well. If you are looking for help, if you are need to reach out, we want to encourage you to reach out to NAMI, 1-800-950-6264, or their website. They have a helpline. We'll also share the suicide prevention hotline during the show. But we want to make sure that people get the help they need and know how to share this help with others, share these resources. We want to thank Bryan for joining us. This is going to be a very critical and inspiring conversation. So take a seat, relax, and we'll go ahead and share the promo video to give you a little bit of a sense of what to expect in today's show. This week on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, former New York Times restaurant critic Bryan Miller. Bryan is the author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. My name is Neil Parekh, and I will be the guest host. The Wine Spectator, in a 1989 front... We'll start that over again, my apologies. One of the things that we like about the promo video is the music, and we certainly want to share our signature song that we've been using. So we'll just take a quick moment and reset and share the one. This will also have captions for you, so if you're watching where you don't have captions, you'll be able to watch with captions in just a moment. Thank you for your patience. Of course, this is live show, so we have things that will come up from time to time like that. So again, our guest is Bryan Miller, and he will be joining us in just a moment. This week on Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along, former New York Times restaurant critic Bryan Miller. Bryan is the author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. My name is Neil Parekh, and I will be the guest host. The Wine Spectator, in a 1989 front page profile, once declared Miller the most powerful restaurant critic in America. From the early 80s to the mid-90s, he seemingly had everything. He ate out 5,123 times, often with celebrities, at fancy restaurants and out-of-the-way places. And for much of that time, he wanted to die. Depression cost him his family, his job, his life savings, and his reputation. He refers to his depression as the Black Bear. Bryan will share his journey coping with and finally conquering his depression on this week's show. Every week, we review the print edition of the Sunday New York Times, taking audience questions and interviewing special guests. The show is produced by Digimentors. We produce high-quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. We also do social and digital consulting, training, and workshops. Sri Srinivasan is our host. I am the executive producer, Neil Parekh. Our production team includes Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Again, Bryan Miller is our guest, live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. That's a little preview of what we can expect in today's show. Again, my name is Neil Parekh. I am the executive producer and guest host of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. And we want to thank everyone who is joining us today. Let's go ahead and welcome some of the folks who are watching. Again, we are live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. And our first guest, my mom. Good morning, Mom, from Hastings-on-Hudson. And I'm looking forward to seeing you next week. Jonathan is watching from the East Village and suffers from chronic depression. Jonathan, thank you so much for sharing that with us. We really appreciate that. We want to make sure that people understand, for folks who are new, we are live every week at 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, and we've established a bit of a community here, a nice family, if you will. And we do consider this a safe space. So, Jonathan, thank you for sharing. We hope if others feel comfortable that they'll share as well. Doug Levy is joining us from the pre-dawn darkness in the greater San Francisco Bay Area. Thank you, Doug, for joining us, as always. Dr. Sujana Chandrasekhar is in Uruguay today. Dr. Chandrasekhar, thank you so much for dialing out to tuning in today. Patricia Freudenberg watching from Long Island. Patricia, always great to see you. Gunther is joining us from Vienna, Austria, our first international guest. We do have folks who log in from around the world. So thank you. Thank you for joining us. Sylvia from Raleigh, North Carolina, congratulations on the victory last night. That was some game. I'm not a huge basketball fan, but I tuned in for the last 10 minutes or so. That was pretty great. Diane Stefani joining us from Margate, New Jersey. And Pradnya is sharing as well that she's telling Jonathan she also suffers from depression and anxiety. So thank you, Pradnya, for sharing that. And Pradnya, of course, lives near me in Silver Spring. She's in Silver Spring, Maryland. I'm in Springfield, Virginia. Ellen is saying hi from the Upper East Side. Donata is joining from Eastchester, New York. My mom is still in the house where I grew up. I'm in Hastings-on-Hudson, not far from Eastchester. Our friend Macron Boot is joining. Thank you for joining. Stefan Kaplan saying hi. I know Stefan is in Ramsey, New Jersey. And Pradnya is tagging friends. So on Facebook or LinkedIn, wherever you might be watching, please tag your friends. Please let them know that they might want to tune in to today's show. Miriam Berkeley is joining from Hell's Kitchen. Our good friend Mary C. Curtis is joining from North Carolina. Looking forward to hearing from Brian, a former New York Times colleague, about such an important topic. And so many dealt with this during COVID and isolation. Absolutely, Mary. Couldn't agree with you more. One of our producers, Paula Kiger, we mentioned in the promo video, is joining us. Thank you, Paula. And Deborah Bernick is joining from here in the DC area. She's not too far from me. And Debbie, thank you for all of your support buying Girl Scout cookies from my daughter. And Donata is saying, Hastings, yes, we're neighbors. So that's great. So I want to again remind everyone that we are going to be talking with Bryan Miller. Bryan is a former restaurant critic for the New York Times and author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph, and I want to emphasize that last word, triumph, over depression. This is going to be both a critical discussion for folks who can hear about his experience, but also know that it should be inspirational in the end. That there is a lot to be thankful for. Um, I want to give a quick shout out to our production team again: Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis, and our sponsor, Muckrack. Muckrack has been a longtime sponsor of Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Thank you for all of your support. And the show, of course, is produced by Digimentors. We produce high quality virtual and hybrid events for organizations big and small around the world. And we do social and digital consulting, talk shows, etc. So if you're interested in having us work with you, please reach out. My Sri's email, Sri's the co-founder, Sri@digimentors.group. I'm our VP of Events and Communications. My email is Neil@digimentors.group. So Sri@digimentors.group or Neil@digimentors.group, and we'd love to work with you on an event. So with that, what we're going to do is switch over to the paper and take a look at what's in the Sunday Times today, and then after that, we'll just take a look at the front page sections, and then bring on our guest, Bryan Miller. So let's take a look at the front page here, and we'll take a look at this a little bit later. But you'll notice that the headline is not a full page, 6-column banner headline. The New York Times stopped its streak at 37 on Thursday. That was the first time they didn't have a banner headline at all. And for all this time, they were all dealing with Ukraine. That's what the paper looked like on Thursday, March 31st. So when you take a look at the rest of the lead story, of course, is still Russia's retreat from Kyiv is seen as a major turn, and that's something that the folks are really paying attention to. Pressure on Merrick Garland, as January 6th inquiry expands. And then how two friends birthed union inside Amazon. That is a huge victory for labor to get a affirmative vote to create a union at one of their warehouses. Below the fold, the slap could damage Smith family's bankable brand. That's, of course, from last week's Academy Awards. Will Smith charging the stage and slapping Chris Rock because of a comment that Chris Rock made about his wife, Jada Pinkett Smith. In Hungary, an old ally of Putin faces voters unnerved by a war. That's about Viktor Orban. So that's what we have on the front page. We'll set that aside for just a moment. And one of the interesting things to note is that the New York Times is printed at something like 26 or 27 printing plants around the country. In New York, they can print more pages per section, but outside of New York, the 25th page gets printed separately. So you get a second part to your front page section every week. The Sunday business section, big dominant photo. What the miners saw in a year above ground. To make ends meet, some striking workers took shifts in an Amazon warehouse, the same place where workers are trying to unionize. And then the bottom is a unexpected luxury ride for car dealers. So we'll take a look at that a little bit later. Sunday styles, desperately seeking surrogates. Many aspiring parents are struggling to find women to carry their babies to term in the pandemic. So that's another full page photo. And again, we're just going to take a look at the front page sections before bringing Bryan on to the show. The bottom story, teen drama star versus crypto. Ben McKenzie tries to cool the hype over digital currencies, including from fellow actors. Sunday Review. This is an interesting piece, Art or Evidence, and it's a full page graphic. When he was 15, Tommy Munswell Kennedy wrote a rap song. It helped put him in prison for life. That's an interesting piece to take a look at. Other stories across the top. Should we care about racial representation in Hollywood? I would think we should. Recent discoveries suggest that the female body may be more resilient, dynamic, and expansive than science has historically considered it. And the traditional family is no longer the norm. Good. So those are the three stories they teased at the top. Arts and leisure. This is interesting. Definitely want to check this out later. Another side of Charo. An over-the-top persona has long masked the entertainer's prodigious talent as a guitarist. My understanding, she was trained as a classical guitarist. So that is an interesting new profile. We have the book review, Midnight in the Mahala. And I started looking at the front page piece earlier. This is set in Cairo, Egypt. I lived there for 2 years. So I'm certainly interested in seeing what that's about. And the New York Times Magazine, I thought the layout was very interesting. It started as a simple mural at a playground in Belarus. It turned into a remarkable campaign of defiance against an increasingly totalitarian regime, The Square of Change by Sarah Topol. So just interesting in terms of the way laid out the headline and the text at the top. So that's the quick tour of the front pages. We will set the paper aside, leave the paper right here rather, and come back to talk with our guest, Bryan Miller. Again, my name is Neil Parekh, and our guest, Bryan Miller, is the former New York Times restaurant critic and author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. And now, Bryan Miller. Bryan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here and to share this book. It's has quite an effect on people. I realized, once the book came out, that so many people have contacted me, and it's evident you poke almost anyone, and they either have a relative or a friend or someone in their lives who has suffered from, we say, clinical depression, which is beyond just the blues. Clinical depression is really defined as having episodes of depression that last at least 2 weeks and carry all the symptoms of malaise, lost interest in anything around you, profound sadness. And statistically speaking, of the people on this call right now, 2 out of every 10 of you either has had, is having, or will have experience with severe depression. Some, it could be a month or 2, or like me, it could be 20 years. So, as I was saying to Neil, it's a little difficult to talk about your book to people who haven't read the book. So I'm just going to read the book jacket, which is very, very concisely tells you what's going on.
Sure. And as you do that, I'm just going to put up the card for the book so people can see Dining in the Dark. Okay. And it has a great blurb from Jose Andres. Beloved for his legendary dispatches from America's greatest restaurants, Bryan Miller brings us the greatest story yet, that of his inspiring journey to triumph over personal hardships with the lessons we can all learn through the power of food. Okay. Bryan, go ahead.
Okay, so what it says on the jacket, which is more concise than I could speak it. Dining in the Dark chronicles Miller's battle with bipolar II disorder, also known as depression, which ruined his life professionally and personally. Depression was directly responsible for his surrendering the New York Times restaurant column and shortly thereafter leaving the paper altogether. Everything he had worked for so diligently, rising from a cub reporter to a big-time city columnist in less than a decade, vanished. In the ensuing years, unable to work, he lost his home, his life savings, 2 wonderful wives, the chance to have a family, and numerous friends and colleagues. He became increasingly reclusive. Like many victims of serious depression, he reached the point where he was afraid to answer the phone. pile on a brain tumor, electroshock therapy, and a near fatal bout with Lyme disease, accidental drug overdoses. He was once carried out of the newsroom on a gurney, and you have a life in shambles. No, I should say has happy ending, but has
it does have a happy ending. I do want to just acknowledge that several people have joined us since we started. Our friend Apollo Jones is watching from Philadelphia. And Naomi Service said, "Good morning from the Upper West Side. Depression is a widespread disease. Good on you for having Bryan to discuss his journey." So again, Bryan, thank you. Eve is joining us from North Carolina. Cherie is joining us from Beverly Hills. Our friend Ron Thomas is in Doha, in Abu Dhabi. So thank you for that. And Liza Donnelly, a friend of yours and one-time neighbor from Rhinebeck. She's also a friend of our show and has been on the show more than once, is watching as well. So thank you for that overview of the book, Bryan. First of all, before we jump in, I just want to check in. I mean, you wrote this book over the pandemic, right? It came out in last fall. Overall, what was what we ask all of our guests over the last 2 years? How has the pandemic been for you? Hopefully, you've been able to stay in good health, friends and family. Tell us about the last 2 years.
Well, actually, the book began 5 or 6 years ago, but I just couldn't get a hold on how the narrative could go, because there were two narratives. One was my life as a restaurant critic and all the fun and wonderful things I did. And then there was the illness. So I really struggled with that. And about 2 years ago, maybe partly because of the pandemic, I found a way, I tried to find a way to weave the two stories, because you can't take a reader from something very light and maybe humorous and then bring him down to the pits of hell. So once I figured that out, I thought, okay, now maybe I have a book. But then the decision was, I've really had a bifurcated life, and with this book, initially I was just going to do Bryan Eats New York and all the funny things that happened to me, and the bodyguards and the photographers chasing me around and crazy restaurant people. Then I thought, well, that would be disingenuous because it had nothing really to do the essence of my life. So then I came around to thinking, okay, I'll do Bryan Eats New York, but I will allude to having a problem. Then I thought about that, and I said that would be dishonest too, and readers aren't stupid. So the third option was just kick down the door and tell everything. Just go for it, and that's what I did, to such extent that I don't like reading the book now because there's stuff that I can't believe I put that in the book. But I decided to kick down the door and make it something that would, illuminate people to what depression is, what their options are. I mean, it's by no means a self-help book, but following my life. And if I could get through it, what I went through, other people could too. So that was basically it. I didn't want it to be a strict depression book.
Sure.
But I wove the fun stuff, what fun there was, through it.
I'll hold up my copy of the book. Certainly, I'll share that. We've had several authors on the show, and as I was telling Bryan before we went live, I read more of this book than I have of any other book that we've featured so far. It is a great, has a great balance, I think, between talking about your depression and going into some detail but also talking about your work at the Times and
Mhm.
some of the behind the scenes stories there. One of the things that you lead with your experience with winning the award from the James Beard Foundation.
Mhm.
And can you tell us a little bit about that night?
Yes, this just back up as I often characterize depression as like the mafia. Depression tells you that you can't go to this party, you can't give this speech, you can't write this article, and it ramps up your anxiety to the point where you're almost frozen. But that was the hardest thing to fight through, to face that down. And I learned uh, that actually you can do it. You can do these things. You might be bleeding from the eyeballs while you're trying to write, but you can do it. Um, and I went through a lot of my after this was all over. When the Times went electronic, they sent me this big box with all of my clippings in it. And so I went through a lot of the articles, seeing if I could determine what articles I wrote depressed and what articles I wrote when I wasn't depressed. And the differences weren't so great. I could see little things here and there, but it just showed that you can do it. Now, I somehow I won this award. It's called the James Beard Lifetime Achievement Award. I was only like 37. I said, what? That's like giving a rookie shortstop, voting him into the Hall of Fame. Anyway, I had to. It came with a big. It was a huge confab down at the Hilton Hotel in Times Square, and foodies from all over the United States came. And I was to go and accept this award and, give a little talk. Now, I'd rather be buried alive than talk to 1,000 people. So I was getting dressed and I thought, well, I got to do it. I put on my suit, my tie, and all ready. And I felt horrible. It was just really, really a bad day, bad week. So I started walking down 6th Avenue and I said, I can't do this. I don't. And then I said to myself, oh, you have to do it. You don't have a choice. It's not an option. You've got this award, thousands of people there. All your Times colleagues are going to be, everybody's going to be there. And you can't just bail. Well, on the way down, there's a restaurant called Ben Benson's. It was a steakhouse, a really nice place. And I just couldn't take another step. So I went into this bar, and I'll make this brief, but basically I did bail and I stayed in the bar all night and met all these characters. So yes, I had overcome the depression to the extent that I could write and actually, do pretty good work. But going to face down all those people, I just couldn't do it. And I went to the office the next day and nobody mentioned it. I have no idea what happened, I wanted to apologize to the organization, but what could I say? I'm not going to go down there and lay out my depression. Depressed people are practiced liars. We lie every day because you can't tell the truth. So I thought, well, I could go down there and lie. Then I was just too cowardly. I never did anything.
You
But
actually, a colleague picked up the award for you, right?
yes. Yeah, Florence Fabricant went up and carried it back. And I gave her a copy of the book when it came out, and she didn't quite remember it, but she knew I didn't show up.
Yeah.
Because there's this award, it's like this bronze trophy, literally, it must weigh 30 pounds. And of course, I didn't pick it up, and I guess she picked it up. And 2 weeks later, UPS came to my house in Rhinebeck and dropped off this statue.
Wonderful.
So that's pretty typical of many, many experiences I had. You know, well, one thing we're talking about coping, you know, in the book, I try to pass along some of the coping mechanisms that I use to get through the day. And one of which is be kind to yourself. If you really, really feel you can't make it, then give yourself a break, you know, every once in a while.
And in your case, you know, the way you described it in the book, and this being you having bipolar depression, you would have 4 days or so that you were working and you were good. You know, you could write a review, I think you said, in a couple of hours. And then you'd have several days where you were just, you know, struggling with depression, and it could take a couple days to write a review. And this was swinging back and forth for years.
For years. Yeah, but it was called cycling.
Hmm.
And, you know, there are several kinds of, quote, manic depression. Bipolar 2 is the manic depression that I had, which means you're okay, you're living your normal life, and then at a certain point you go down, and you stay down for an undetermined amount of time. Then you come back up. Bipolar 1, that's the where, you know, you're okay. Then you go into a manic, very high state and come back down. I'd never experienced that, but yeah.
And so I just want to again say hi to a few folks. My sister is tuning in from Bellevue, Washington. Again, it's early in the morning for our friends on the West Coast. Thank you, Amy. Looking forward to seeing you next week. And our friend Prabodh Kumar Sharma is joining from Riverdale, and he says, you know, good morning to all of the viewers and to Bryan as well. You know, this was also, there was another time, Bryan, you talk about going to you were scheduled to give a remarks at a conference, I think
Right.
in Toronto or somewhere in Canada, and you got as far as the gate. Can you tell us about, you know, both when you were going to the award ceremony and then, you know, didn't, and then you were at the gate but you didn't. Can you tell us about that internal dialogue that's taking place? What are you thinking in your head? Is it just a stop, this isn't going to happen, or is this an extended internal conversation?
No, it's not. It's more impulsive. I mean, when you're depressed, that's all you think about is having, you know, getting it away. So I'm standing at the desk there, and I was just thinking how horrible it was going to be versus not showing up. And it's a decision you make on the spot. You don't give it a lot of thought, depending on how badly you feel. I don't know if I had a real thought process. I was just standing there, and I just turned around and walked away. The big award ceremony, that was also abject fear, because I didn't think I'd be able to do it, to stand up there and talk for 10 minutes, because your mind is so muddled and fuzzy, and it feels like there are cotton balls in there. And once again, the mafia tells you, you can't do this. There's no way you're going to get up there and give a 10-minute talk. When in fact, the truth is you can, but you have to get to the point where you can spit in the eye of the depression and say, I'm going to try anyway. So a lot of it's just visceral. You just go with the flow. Every day presents, huge challenges, and you just try to take them one at a time. Try, if you can, to compartmentalize your life, like your day, into 3 or 4 stretches, and take each one. You don't think back, you don't think forward. You just deal with everything that comes at you.
You talked about your work as a restaurant critic. You dined out 5,000 times, more than 5,000 times, various
Yeah.
restaurants, and these were often social occasions. You were with other people. You had a process where you'd go several times with a group,
Mhm.
and you'd order food, taste everything. um, Tell us
Mhm.
about what it was like to actually do that while suffering from depression. To be in that kind
Mhm.
of public space and engaging with people. What was it like when you were ready to, when you went to the door, for example, went to a restaurant and got ready to go
Yeah.
in?
Well, I often say that I had one of the most social lives in New York City while suffering from the most misanthropic diseases ever. Um, and once again, I had to do it. It was my job. I couldn't just stay home and watch TV. Um, and it was just something that I had to face down the mafia and go do it. Um, when I got to the door, once again, I'll say that probably 40 to 50% of the time I was fine. I mean, these cycles, for a long time, there were 7 days. I could set my watch by it, that I would go down and I knew exactly when I was going to come back up. So I could plan things around when I'm being up and work like 18 hours a day during that stretch and then ease off. So I did a little of that with the dining, although I had to go out pretty much every night. Um, and as I said, the people, the worst thing for a depressed person is being with other people, normal people, because you feel as if you are not really part of life around you. You're kind of like floating above in the ceiling, or you're there but you're not there. You're talking but you're not really talking. But once again, depression people are great liars and great actors. I could go through 3 hours at a restaurant and tell jokes and all kinds of things while I'm dying inside, and that's I feel a real camaraderie with people who have been through depression, because they understand that,
Sure.
uh, and only those people. In fact, I have a great quote here in the book that tells it better than I could. There's a writer named Wilford Sheed. He's a playwright and he's written movies. Wonderful man. He passed away about 10 years ago, but he had a fairly short-lived experience with depression. But I put this as the beginning to the book. Words are for what other people have been through, and nobody who has been through this particular experience has ever been able to convey it to anyone who hasn't, perhaps for the simple reason that it has no features to speak of. It is nothing to the nth power, nothing to heightened to the screaming point. So, yeah, there's one reason, this is getting off topic, but I've just never told anyone because people wouldn't understand. The only person who understood, someone maybe a lot of people on this call knows, Arthur Gelb, who was the
Hmm.
assistant managing editor. But he was kind of my mentor, and he he offered me the job as restaurant critic when I was in really bad shape, and I turned it down. He was just so flabbergasted. He'd never seen an employee turn down a raise and a big promotion. But then finally, I spilled it out to him, and he was very, very supportive. But I guess I'm getting off point. But the point is, you cannot explain it to anyone.
Sure.
You can't do it.
For folks who are just joining us, Bryan Miller is the author of Dining in the Dark, a famed restaurant critic's struggle with and triumph over depression. And we're thankful that Bryan is joining us today. If I want to share some of the comments that came earlier in case folks missed it, and just to kind of reiterate that you are that people understand what you're talking about. Jonathan said. Offered greetings earlier and said he suffered from chronic depression. Pradnya said, me too, depression and anxiety. Our friend Naomi said, good morning, and depression is a widespread disease. Good on you for having Bryan to discuss his journey. My mom, who is a psychotherapist, she was a social worker for many years, said, you're honest and forthcoming about your life history of depression. Very few people can express this so frankly. It'll be inspirational for others to verbalize their feelings, and I congratulate you. And you have a former colleague, Penny Gaffney, who is watching. I assume from what she said, sorry to hear about what you went through. Glad to hear that you've made it through the dark. Working with you was always interesting. Looking forward to reading your book. So thank you, Penny, for watching. I think that it is inspirational. It is important that people talk about this. It's not something that people talk about a lot. I know that you hid it for many years. You talked about how you got good at covering up, and that at some point you just had to not only tell your employer, but then you went and also wrote a book about it to share with people. I'll say for myself. I have suffered from anxiety and occasional bouts of depression. It's not something that I talk about publicly. I mentioned it once on a show earlier. For folks who are familiar with the show, longtime watchers, you'll know that we've covered some very serious topics. We did this is a bit of a trigger warning for folks, but we did do a lot of conversation during the Brett Kavanaugh hearings about sexual assault. We've had several guests on who've talked about advocacy and being a survivor. I felt more comfortable talking about my own history being abused than I did talking about my own challenges with anxiety. Where do you think we are as a society today, 2022? Is it a little bit easier to talk about this out loud?
Well, the popular press for probably 15, 20 years has been maintaining that people are very open today to talk about mental illness and treatment. And I don't buy it. I don't think if it's serious mental illness, if you have like a serious depression, certainly any kind of schizophrenia and all, it's still not wise to tell people ask me for a lot of advice, young people. I say, if you're going to confide to someone you really, really trust, and don't. I don't think we're at the point where it's prudent to bring it out. Now, many people. I think I wrote that before I experienced all this, my belief that was 11 out of 10 Manhattanites were in therapy, and sort of dismissed it as expensive hand-holding. But I went through it, and I have such respect for it. It saved my life, partially saved my life. So in short, I don't advise people, right? Your family and maybe even very close friends, they're not going to understand it. So, and what often happens, people, because depression is like punching a ghost, a lot of people, not all, but ascribe culpability to it, and that you must have done something to get yourself in this shape, or something happened to you. So come on, snap out of it. This is which is the worst possible thing you could say to a depressed person. Snap out of it. I didn't
Yeah.
do anything. I didn't. Why at age 30, everything was going great. It was absolutely. I was on this trajectory. I was in love. I was, living in a wonderful place, and the ceiling fell in. How can you? Even my girlfriend at the time, that my wife became my wife, she didn't really understand what was going on with me. Not being able to get up and moping around the house, not being able to, and not knowing for months. I didn't even know anything about depression. I thought I had a brain tumor. And so that's personally, I wouldn't spread it around.
Sure.
Be very,
Sure.
very discreet.
A few more people are checking in. I think a friend of yours, Richard Raskin, is saying good morning. So, Richard, thank you for joining us. And then a few more comments. Naomi says, your book is as crucial to understanding depression now as was Andrew Solomon's The Noonday Demon. And I think that's certainly a good point. Ron Thomas says, I think we all are at some times in our lives, whether it is imposter syndrome, anxiety, etc. The voice in the head, you have to control it, and that's the self-talk that people often have to deal with. Patty says, kudos to both you and I for sharing vulnerability for the sake of helping others with the struggle. Thank you, Patty, for joining that, sharing that. Jonathan said that this may be purely anecdotal, but often when he mentions that he suffers from depression, he gets told, no, you're not. And so for folks to deny that is certainly hard. I'm gonna leave that there. I'm going to share a longer comment from Ellen and read through it. That she loved reading your reviews and fancied some of the restaurants. She was on jury duty with a restaurant critic, and she talked and invited him. He invited her to lunch. And I said I couldn't order. He had to try certain things. Was interested. So many dishes, so many tastes. 2 days in a row. Then we were dismissed. I look for him every time I'm on jury duty. Yes, he's well known. She was talking about her experience. I know that you had a process where you had people join you for lunches and eat certain meals and get their feedback. You can taste different things as well. Before we shift gears and talk about the paper, I also want to let people know in terms of in talking with Bryan and knowing about his story. It's not just a story about someone who was a restaurant critic who suffered from depression who came out of it. Bryan is a man of many talents, and some of them include working with a colleague on cartoons, coming up with the concept and the captioning. I think your colleague does the writing, right?
No, I do the writing. He does.
You do the writing. He does the drawing, rather. And this was, I would like to use the word
pétillance
more often. What does it mean? What does it mean, Bryan?
Oh, it's when it's a little bit of tartness, a little bit of effervescence in a wine.
And this one was a Trojan Bordeaux. Another one, what he lacks in technique, he makes up for in loyalty. That's a sous chef, I guess, who is a dog.
Yeah.
And then you also played in a band, Zydeco, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Tell us about your band.
Well, I went down to Louisiana on a story to write about the food, and I went to a music club, and I heard this incredible music. It was just, it was really driving blues like, but with accordion and washboard, and some of it was French. And I thought, this is wild. Now I started a band in seventh grade, so I've always been doing it. So I came back to New York and put together an ersatz uh, Zydeco band. I found an accordion player, and we kept it up for more than 15 years. So it was really fun.
Absolutely. And here's we have a little video from that piece that you wrote, dancing, dining, and daiquiris in Cajun country.
Mm-hmm.
With rice and pork, and the Cajun answer to pork rinds. Both are sold across Acadiana in specialty meat shops, roadside gas stations, liquor stores, and seemingly everywhere in between. At night, head to a live music venue like the Blue Moon for a taste of what a Cajun fado or dance party is all about.
And one of the restaurants you went to, you talked about in the piece, Préjean's in Lafayette.
Right.
Right. I've actually been there myself. I've spent a lot of time in Louisiana when I worked with United Way. I went to. I've been to Baton Rouge, New Orleans, Lafayette, Lake Charles as well. So it was nice to see that. You are also another interesting tidbit, just in terms of your family. You are an older father.
Yes.
Tell us about that. Tell us what it's.
Well, this also, because I was so ill, I fell ill around 30. I just was so concerned about I didn't know if I was going to make it. I really had doubts that I was going to make it. And I thought, I can't bring a child into this world, if I'm not going to live through it. So I put it off and put it off and put it off. And then, 15 years ago, when I was, quote, cured, everything was gone. I was fine, and I was sure it wasn't coming back. Then I had a child. So it's his 17th birthday next week. Just got his driver's license. So I'm doing all the things that most dads do in their 30s. And it's great. Fortunately, I'm in relatively good health. And once again, I wish I'd done it 20 years ago, but this couldn't be better now.
Sure. Mary C. Curtis says she had no idea of what you were going through when she used to copy edit your reviews. You were always so gracious, and appreciate your openness. Many will relate, as we have said earlier. Richard is sharing, you can't see depression. People don't get it. A broken leg, on the other hand, is much easier for people to understand. Nikhil is joining late, but so appreciate this discussion. I wonder if everyone's journey with depression is so unique that we can't learn from others. I hope that's not the case. For folks who may have joined late, I just want to remind you that you can watch the show as soon as it's over, wherever you're watching, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our Digimentors website. As soon as the show is over, you'll be able to watch it from the beginning on the same links. So you'll definitely want to do that. We certainly have covered a lot, and we will definitely cover more. Richard says it's so courageous. And our friend Tim Sohn is watching as well from Pennsylvania. With that, we're approaching, just before 9:30. Bryan, what we'd like to do is to shift gears a little bit and talk about the newspaper. And certainly, as we do that, if anything comes up that you want to comment on, if there's a story that strikes your fancy, please feel free to jump in. And certainly we'll take a look at the style section. And if you have comments about, more comments about the paper and restaurant reviews, etc., please feel free to add them as we go. So we'll bring up the paper. And again, we're live on Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, and YouTube. Please let us know where you're watching from. Please like, comment, and share. And tag your friends so they can watch the show as well. So this is the we looked at the front page earlier of the front section. The Inside the Times is my favorite column. It's on page 2. In Ukraine, compassion endures. This is a look at some of the correspondence, first-person accounts from some of the correspondence from Ukraine, which is interesting. We will flip through the international section, a parenthetical Thai capital, and a parentheses in the headline, of course, residents see bigger issues. A push for a loftier name backed by decree offends those struggling to get by. In a punctuation shift, here's the caption. Officials ruled that Bangkok should be known as Krung Thep Maha Nakhon, parentheses Bangkok, instead of Krung Thep Maha Nakhon, semicolon, Bangkok. Copy editors around the world, I'm sure, are looking at this very closely and trying to make sense of it. Madrid rivals Miami as a haven for Latin Americans and their money. And then from South Asia, claiming conspiracy, and we'll put this under the camera right here, claiming conspiracy, Pakistan leader vows to dismiss no confidence vote. That's Prime Minister Imran Khan. This is what so far in the international section. LinkedIn pulled an ad favoring black hires. Then Brazil protested. That's interesting. Taking on U.S. tech giants and the power they hold abroad. Let's see, what else do we have? This is the continuation, the jump of the story on Viktor Orban in Hungary. A loyal Putin ally is facing voters unnerved by an invasion. And we always like to take a look at the ads. This is a full-page ad for Avenue 8, the new way home. Let's make the place at the very center of our lives easier to make our own. Interesting layout on that. And a full spread. Here's interesting. Here's an interesting ad. This is for celebrity cruises. And you can see the top half across the fold. And then the bottom half, all-inclusive photo project made possible by Celebrity Cruises. Celebrity Cruises is starting a movement to address underrepresentation in travel marketing through our all-inclusive photo project. In partnership with world-renowned photographers, we have created the world's first open-source photo library featuring ethnic, disabled, curvy, and LGBTQ+ changemakers. We invite our industry to join us in changing the face of travel. That is certainly very, very interesting, worth looking into. Celebrity.com/photo project is the URL. It's not often that you see a bearded Sikh man in a what looks like a travel shot. Looks like it's either a cruise or somewhere in a getaway, and obviously in a meditative position. More articles about Ukraine, Russia's retreat, the outgunned town that fought off Russia and protected Kyiv. And more on Putin's failures pile up. Let's see what else. A lot of international news. I'm surprised at the number of pages devoted to international news, not just Ukraine. Taking a desert road trip along the King's Highway to see Jordan's treasures. Petra, an ancient city situated along important trade routes between the Middle East and Northern Africa, is full of temples, tombs, and altars. My wife and I actually went to Petra in somewhere, it must have been 2004, but we were living in Egypt from 2003 to 2005. So here, in terms of national news, U.S. news, a mystery over who wrote the Pledge of Allegiance. A long full-page story about that. How two friends birthed a union inside Amazon on Staten Island. And then an article about the slap, Will Smith's slap of Chris Rock at last week's Academy Awards. So that's the front page section. Brian, when you read the paper, where do you go after the front page? What's your where do you go to next?
Oh,
or where would you
boy.
like to go?
I usually go to the business section. There is no, on Sunday, there really isn't food section. I think in the magazine there is. Yeah, I usually do that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've written a lot for the travel section, so I go there.
Great. Let's take a look at business then, and also check in. We have Deborah is saying it's excellent magazine for those living with, or this show excellent for those living with bipolar and their loved ones. Oh, BP Hope. She's talking about BP Hope.
Yes, I
You
can't
had
attend.
an article in there as well
Yeah, they
that we
did
shared.
an interview, I believe.
Yeah, which is good. So definitely appreciate that. Um, and so the business section, what the miners saw in a year above ground. Braxton Wright is a second-generation coal miner, a diehard Union supporter, and until recently a staunch Republican. He's named after his uncle, a Korean War veteran who was fatally crushed between two rail cars while working at the Pullman train factory near Birmingham. And Curtis Turner, the president of United Mine Workers of America Local 2427, is one of hundreds of Warrior Met coal mine workers who have been on strike for more than a year. Let's see what else is in the business section. So profile, corner office, no longer running, but still in the race. Jim Weber, chief executive, Brooks Running. Adversity, personal and professional, hasn't shaken a leader's sense of purpose for himself or his business. And he has no plans to retire from the dream job he's had for years. The long roots of a people's revolt against Wall Street. And over here, unexpected luxury ride for car dealers. That was from the front page. Let's see. This is the continuation of that story on the miners. So this is really interesting. I worked with a union in Washington State. My mom is a proud member, retired member of SEIU 1199. So our union loyalties run deep in our family. Real estate. Now this is in DC. The real estate section is just 2 pages, separated but still under the same roof. Some couples who've ended their marriages find common ground at home. That certainly, I'd imagine, would be challenging. And we don't usually look at this, but if you look at the what you get section for $630,000, they actually feature Mandeville, Louisiana. It's way at the bottom here, if you can make this out. An 1893 house with 2 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, and a 1-bedroom guest house on 0.7 of an acre, 1,400 square feet. How much time have you spent in Louisiana, Brian?
Excuse me?
How much time have you spent in Louisiana?
Oh,
How
I've
often
been
did you get
down there
there?
quite a bit. I have friends there. I go down at least once a year, maybe twice.
Great. Sunday Styles. That's where the restaurant reviews would be, right?
I don't know. It's I don't
It used to be in the style section. That's where you.
Well, I was in the weekend section,
Weekend. Okay.
which used to be on Fridays.
Got it. Flipping through here.
Yeah.
We have the social cues column. If you're up for a little social cues, Philip Galans writes, my husband and I got married in Palm Springs in October. We live in Los Angeles and encouraged people to come out for the weekend. Apart from the wedding and reception, we hosted a welcome party on Friday and a farewell brunch on Sunday. About a third of our guests did not give us a wedding gift. Most of these people are relatives who flew in from the East Coast. Many of their travel expenses were covered by my grandfather, who put them up for the weekend. Are we still obliged to write thank you notes to them? I'm inclined not to. I don't think I need to thank people for going on an expense-paid vacation. I'm going to put you on the spot, Brian. What do you think? Thank you notes for people who came to the wedding without a gift and had their expenses paid for?
And had all their expenses paid for?
Yeah.
Oh, definitely. Handwritten note.
Handwritten note. Engraved, maybe?
Maybe, yeah.
Philip says, I get that you feel aggrieved by guests who didn't give you and your husband a wedding gift. Skipping thank you notes to them probably won't make you feel much better, though. When I believe I've been wronged, as you seem to, what helps me most is trying to imagine the other person's perspective. Let's take your East Coast relatives, for example. Even if your grandfather paid for their lodgings, they still had to spend hundreds of dollars at least to fly across the country. So the lodgings were covered. That's not nothing. They also attended several events that were all about you and your husband. That's a kind of gift too, and not much like a typical vacation activity for me. Now, would it have killed these people to spend a few bucks more on a present? Probably not. And a few gifts may still roll in. Etiquette rules give people a year to send them, but they may have decided they spent enough on your wedding already in dollars, time, and effort. So I hope you can appreciate what they did to help celebrate your big day without focusing exclusively on the gifts. I thank them for joining you. Interesting response from Philip. Looking at the rest of the style section, so I guess the reviews would be in a Friday.
Yeah,
section.
now they are in the Wednesday food section.
In Wednesday food. Got it. So let's talk about reviews for just a moment. You did you've done a number of reviews. Two stand out to me. One is they're kind of on opposite ends of the spectrum. One is Le Bernardin, which you gave a 4-star review for. And Frank Bruni reviewed the same restaurant 16 years later, gave it another 4 stars. You also did a review of Mama Leone's restaurant, and it didn't quite get 4 stars. I don't think it got any stars, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah.
Tell us about that swing. If you were to take a guess over the course, how many 4-star reviews did you give out in your career?
Very few. At any given time, there were probably 4 or 5 4-star reviews, and many of those were the same ones over and over. I probably gave out maybe 20 in 10 years.
24-star reviews?
Now, at Le Bernardin, my methodology was the paper's methodology. You go to a restaurant 3 times, generally with 4 people, and that would afford me a chance to sample 36 to 40 dishes, and then before I would write. Sometimes after 3, I still couldn't decide whether it was a 1 or a 2, or so I would just go back. And fortunately, I had the budget. I kept asking them if I had a budget, and the times like they wouldn't answer me. I said, I've got money falling out of my pockets walking down the street. Don't I have some kind of budget? I said, don't worry about it. And one day I asked the assistant managing editor, his name was Warren Hogue. I said, come on, do I really have an unlimited budget? So I'm spending at least $125,000 a year dining out. And I don't know, it seems like a lot. Why should I worry? But I just, maybe my background does not come from that kind of money. He said, let me put it this way. We have a correspondent in Nairobi. To keep that correspondent in Nairobi costs the paper about $125,000 a year. And he said, we get a lot more bang for the buck from you. He said, don't worry about it. But Le Bernardin was such an important review because it just came over from Paris. It had a lot of buzz. It was a very theatrical place. I went, actually, the owner told me this years later. I went eight times with 4 people.
8 times. Wow.
8 times before giving us 4 stars.
So, and on the opposite end of that spectrum, I just want to put up an excerpt from your Mama Leone review. Upon being seated, you are presented with a platter of Italian bread strewn with cottony cubes of pale tomato and garlic, which they call bruschetta. And bruschetta is one of my favorite dishes. at any restaurant. A rubbery brick of tasteless mozzarella, the color of old soap, a dish of olives, slices of pepperoni, and a basket of breadsticks. As for the service staff, I've had warmer encounters with people serving me traffic summonses. The weary veterans I encountered, all wearing gold badges with their tours of duty, Mama Leone's since 1954, trudge around their defined stations with the apparent goal of exerting the least possible energy on an 8-hour shift. When I made the unpardonable mistake of asking a waiter assigned to the adjacent territory for a clean fork, mine was smudged and encrusted. He grunted and pointed to another waiter at the far end of the room. Now, lest people think that Bryan took any joy in doing this, there are rules that you wrote by, if you will, lived by. Um, this is what you wrote in this piece. I wielded a long and lethal sword. Be demanding but fair. These are people's livelihoods you were messing with. Be specific. If you're critical of the food, explain precisely why it is substandard. It is not fair to the chef to simply declaim you don't like it. And never go to restaurants when you are bored, tired, or not hungry. Your readers dine out enthusiastically and hoping for the best. So should you. Mama Leone's must have really deserved it if that's the review they got, huh?
Yeah, and Mama Leone's was owned by a very big restaurant company called Restaurant Associates, mostly high-end places. My wife worked at Restaurant Associates. They're in a division of catering, and they were doing, I think, the U.S. Open. But she had to go to work the next morning, and she said no one said a word to her. And, I just had to, in a way, it could be a conflict of interest with my wife working at this company, but I had to review it and just call it as it was and see what happened.
Ellen shares that Mama Leone's was for tourists. Such a sad excuse for a restaurant, but tourists loved it.
Yeah.
And Paula appreciates your masterful turns of phrase. Certainly agree with that. Richard gives you the moniker best food writer ever. That is certainly high praise, indeed. Several other people are watching as well. Liza Donnelly, it was great fun to eat out with you when you would take Michael, her husband, and I out on one of your reviews. So certainly people are remembering some of these experiences fondly. And again, we shared that just to show that range. If you think that you had, in terms of the 4-star reviews, how many times would you have panned a restaurant as strongly as it did Mama Leone's? What is that?
Mama Leone's was an exception because it was very well known. It was for tourists, which is fine. I was hoping it would be a good tourist restaurant, but I didn't. My philosophy was people didn't buy the Friday New York Times to find out where not to go in a restaurant. So if a restaurant was made little known and it turned out to be bad, I didn't see the point in killing a flea with a sledgehammer. So I just didn't bother wasting readers' time. But many restaurants I had to review, like Mama Leone or like all the new places that were opening at that time. So, and if I had to write a negative review, I would do 2 reviews that week. So readers would have at least something positive on the page. It didn't just go, and come away with nothing. And I must also add, I started in the early 80s until the mid 90s. This was pre blogging, internet and all. And I was it, basically. There was a woman named Gail Green who wrote for New York Magazine, and she had a column. But we were the only weekly restaurant columnists in New York, and far wider than that, I'm sure. So I've actually felt sometimes as if I had too much power, which is too much. And restaurants on Thursday nights, the paper came out, Friday, Thursday night around 10:30. There was a gaggle of restaurant owners in the Times lobby with quarters, waiting for the pressman to come down from the press room with literally hot off the press papers, put them in the box, and these guys will all be buying them because it was really the only big game in town. And I wanted more competition. I wanted more context. But for 10 years, it had nothing to do with my abilities. It was just that we were it, and the Times was it. Today, I think it's far less potent than it was back then, because there's so many, bloggers and websites and all of that. But
it's yeah, that makes sense in terms of there isn't that same the field is very different right now. I want to go ahead.
No, I'm going to write a review, and 15 minutes later, there are 20 bloggers chewing on your backside, telling you, all the things you did wrong.
Well, and I think that the other reality is that now everyone can be a restaurant critic with Yelp and other review sites.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly not just they're just a lot of information out there for folks. Yeah. I do want to thank Barca Cardoz for joining us. Her husband Floyd, and I know that Srinivasan is close with them. Worked at L'Espinasse pronunciation.
Mm-hmm.
How bad was that? When you reviewed it, you reviewed it as part of your Diners Journal series.
Well, I started a Diners Journal column of course, when I got there, New York was still a very French town, and Times diners tended to dine upscale, and there was nothing for young people or people, on budgets. So I created this Diners Journal, both to preview restaurants. Bernadette, I was basically just saying they're going to open. Mm-hmm. Sort of a competitive thing. I wanted to be on top of that. And then a month later or so, I would review it.
And so we're sharing the review that you had. Thank you, Barca, for joining us today. Really appreciate it. A couple other comments. Carla is asking, Bryan, do you still enjoy eating out, or is that like a busman's holiday?
No, I'm after that all the time. One, it was my beat. It was my life. That's one part of it. Two, I love food. I love the theatrics of a restaurant or how restaurants work. I've worked in restaurant kitchens, and I've always said to myself, if there's some evening I just really don't want to go out, or I've just had one too many restaurants, I wouldn't go out. I'd stay mm-hmm. home, because I wanted to go to a restaurant the way my readers did, which is enthusiastic and hoping for the best. So I never went, and it was pretty rare where I didn't feel like going out.
Sure.
It's like saying, I really don't want to go to the Mets game. I don't want to cover another Mets game. I'll do it from the radio.
Barca mentioned that L'Espinasse got 3 stars on the review, which is very, very good. And Deborah and we join Deborah in offering condolences for Floyd, who passed away.
Mhm.
He worked with her friend Judy on India food tours, and he is
Mhm.
missed. So certainly, Barca, you have our deepest condolences. This was, I believe, 2 years ago in the beginning of COVID. Um, and but So again, I want to, for folks who may have joined us late, Bryan Miller is our guest. He was a longtime critic, food critic at the New York Times, and the whole time that he was working there, he suffered from major depression, and so much so that he eventually had to leave his post. He wrote a book, "Dining in the Dark: A Famed Restaurant Critic's Struggle with and Triumph Over Depression." And here you see a blurb from Jose Andres from World Central Kitchen. I brought the book and read a lot of it myself. It's not just in terms of the story about your struggle with depression. There are also great tidbits about your work at the Times,
Mhm.
and conversations with other folks. There's a great piece about your evening with Dolly Parton, which number of famous people that you got to meet with. I mean, you were on top of the world, both in terms of celebrities within the Times, etc.
Mhm.
Um, and I think the important thing for folks to know is that even with the struggle with depression and everything that you went through, and all the challenges there, you did survive. You did work through it.
Mhm.
Pradnya asked, what did you do to help mitigate the cycle and depression in general? Therapy, medication. What ended up working for you?
Well, mine was a very, very complicated case, but I had, excellent psychopharmacologist and excellent therapist, and it took a long time. My advice to people, especially young people who are, when the parents know me and ask me to speak with them, I say, one, go immediately to a psychopharmacologist, because if you're really feeling horrible, you probably can't take full advantage of psychotherapy, because it gets yourself on your feet. Go to a therapist and stick with it. Um, because I do feel that in 2022, there's no reason for someone to suffer as I did and for that long. And, depression doesn't play fair. So you have to be, forever vigilant and find your corners of relief, and you know it's forever moving, and that's why you need the therapy.
Um,
and
Absolutely.
and with medications today, I think 3 out of 4, or more than 3 out of 4 individuals with the clinical depression are do I think we use the word cure, but do get significant relief um, within like 3 or 4 months. And so it's there are a lot of medicines out there. You just get the right people on your team, and there's there's really hope. I mean,
It's
I was a little late for it, but a little early for it.
but it worked.
Mhm.
I want to let folks know we're going to give Bryan a quick break. I'm going to make a few quick announcements, and then we're going to ask him to come back and share some final thoughts and a pro tip for writers. And we do have a question in particular for people who are starting off as a food critic. I'll put it on the screen for you just so you can start thinking about it.
Mhm.
Um, and then you can come back and share your thoughts. Nandita is asking for food writers, restaurant reviewers who are starting. What tips can you share?
Mhm.
Um, so we'll give you a chance to think about that for a moment, and we will bring you back in just a moment. Again, my name is Neil Parekh. I am the guest host for Sri's Sunday New York Times Read Along. We've been talking with Bryan Miller. If you are joining late, or if you joined late, feel free to, when you're done, the show will be available on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, on YouTube, on our Digimentors website to watch from the beginning. And I certainly encourage you to do so. It's been a great conversation with Bryan. We covered a lot about his experience at the Times, his struggle with depression, but as you heard, his eventual triumph as well. So we want to make sure that people are, understand that full cycle. As far as our show is concerned, we want to make sure that you know that we wouldn't be able to do it with our team of Paula Kiger, Steve Taylor, Julia Weeks, and Carla Baranakis. Thank you so much for all of your support. You can follow Paula at Big Green Pen, Steve Taylor at Steve DeReeve, Julia Weeks at Julia L. Weeks, and Carla Baranakis at Kabara. And when we mention Carla, we always want to bring up the Local Connection newsletter. The Center for Cooperative Media at Montclair State University brings you the Local Connection newsletter. Each week, it offers story ideas and pro tips for journalists. Best of all, it's free. You can subscribe at bit.ly/local news tips. bit.ly/local news tips. A shout out to our sponsor, Muck Rack, longtime sponsor of Sree's Sunday New York Times Read Along. Thank you for all of your support. And again, as a reminder, the New York Times Read Along is produced by Digimentors, a social and digital consulting firm. Sree is the co-founder. I am the vice president of events and communications. And if you'd like us to produce a show like this for you, please get in touch. We do virtual events, hybrid events. We also do social and digital consulting. You can reach Sree at Sree@digimentors.group, or you can reach me, Neil, at digimentors.group. Again, Sree@digimentors.group and Sree@digimentors.group. Those are the email addresses. And finally, I just want to remind folks, we've been showing it as a ticker across the screen. We have the information on reaching NAMI. If you or someone you know needs help, if you're suffering from anxiety or depression, please reach out to the NAMI helpline, 1-800-950-6264, or you can send an email, info@nami.org. Also, the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline provides 24/7 free and confidential support for people in distress. You can reach them at 1-800-273-8255, 1-800-273-8255. Please know that you're not alone. With that, we want to bring back Bryan Miller. Bryan, want to ask you to offer a final thought and some advice. Nandita had asked for food writers, restaurant reviewers who are starting, what tips can you share?
Don't eat breakfast. If you're going to be having a big lunch, big dinner. The most important thing, I think, and I know hardly any food reviewers who have done it, you should work in a restaurant before you start. You should know how you learn food preparation. So when you criticize something or you praise something, you do it in an informed manner. Now, often, on a lot of blogs and websites, it's just, I like this, I didn't like that. Or the more knowledge you bring to it, the more you'll be respected. And one thing I find very gratifying is now, whenever I meet restaurateurs who are around when I was doing it, they always said I was constructive. I didn't punch below the belt. And if there was something that was substandard, I just said so and tried to suggest what could have been done that way. And in terms of, outlets, there's so many online outlets. Of course, most of them won't even pay for your meal. But find something like that just to get started. And it's a whole different world now. So, and also you have to, the writing is very important. So study, work on your writing. read good writing, and because you have to pull people into the stories. If it's written in a very flat, unappetizing way, people aren't going to read it. So,
one last question, Bryan, that came in from Sylvia watching on YouTube. Is your book your greatest accomplishment professionally?
oh boy. I like to think about going to 5,000 restaurants and writing how many hundreds of reviews in aggregate. I'm proud of that because of the situation under which I did it, and I never thought I would make it that far. So I'm in a strange way, I'm kind of proud of that. The book was, I don't know, it was an afterthought, but it wasn't something I'd really planned on. And it just one day I said, I feel fine now. I'm fine. I've been fine for 15 years. I'm not going to be depressed again. That's for sure. And I still take some, medications, but when it was all over and it was better, this was just something I hadn't really thought of doing a tell-all. As I said, I was thinking of doing tell a little book and mostly about food. So that's number two. The book would be number two.
Got it. Well, we want to thank folks for watching. Patricia says thanks again to Bryan and the production team. Awesome episode, especially focusing on mental health awareness. Debbie suggested that local libraries should order the book and that we should prod them. And she's going to talk to the Arlington Library.
Mm-hmm.
Apollo Jones says, great show. Have a great week ahead. Jonathan also says, very good show. Very important topic. Thank you. And for next week, hopefully folks will join us. We're going to do a special Inky read along. The Philadelphia Inquirer, Mike Sealski, the sports columnist for the Philadelphia Inquirer and author of The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality, will be our guest. So please join us next week, 8:30 a.m. Eastern Time, for a special Inky read along. And with that, we want to thank Bryan for joining us. Again, if you joined late, you can watch the show as soon as we finish on the same channels, on Facebook, on Twitter, on LinkedIn, YouTube, and our Digimentors website. Thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next week. Bye-bye.